Hello, so I'm gonna have to be a bit quiet to this whole video, but hopefully I'm holding my mic close enough to my mouth that should all be still pretty clear. Having to record it a bit later than I would have liked, because I only realised when I went to edit it there was no sound. I was a bit confused about that at first, because I distinctly remembered this time I made absolutely sure that my mic wasn't muted. However, it looks like the reason is that I briefly unplugged my mic at some point and my OBS didn't figure out that I plugged it back in. Also, just a side note, just in case it affects any future videos, my mic stand kinda broke. When I say kind of, I can still technically use it, but a piece has fallen out of it. Well, two pieces actually, and I can sort of jam them back into place to get it to still stand up, but it's obviously a lot more shaky. So that's another reason why I'm holding the mic to my mouth this video instead of putting it up on the stand, is because it's going to take ages to get it to stand up. And there's a good chance it'll just fall over while I'm recording anyway. I also might go a little bit quicker with this patch, at least when I talk about the individual changes, because a lot of them I don't have that much to say about, except a more kind of broad concern with the whole patch, just, well, as a whole. Anyway, with all that said, this is the mid-season, so anyone who played last half of a season would have noticed that a certain artifact was absolutely rampant, and that was of course Thorn Ring, which did get nerfed this patch. However, I think this nerf was pretty soft. All they did was they made it so that you have to spend one more gold on spells before its effect triggers. But the ice crystals have not been nerfed. Quick note to make in post, I did overlook something small on the Thorn Ring nerf, I must admit. I got so mad when I saw this that I kind of just didn't read the rest of it, and I noticed now that it says spend all counters to summon an ice crystal, and I will say that does something here. I do think that is a step in the right direction, somewhat. It pulls Thorn Ring in a slightly more tempo orientated direction rather than a control one, although it's still generally control. This might sound like a straight up buff, and don't get me wrong, there are definitely situations where this is literally just a buff. Like, I'm surprised they kind of labeled this as a straight up nerf and not as a rework, because again, context dependent, this is literally just a buff. However, what might be significant is that this new version of Ice Crystal, or Thorn Ring rather, doesn't play the Ice Crystal, it summons it, which means its magic won't trigger, which means you no longer get a paralyze off of it, you just get a taunt that has a one-sided board clear. But I mean, in fairness, when that taunt with a one-sided board clear is a 4/4 taunt that cost you 0 gold, that's one-sided board clear is literally basically as strong as Police Line is most of the time, which is a 7-cost spell, and also does damage to face. Yeah, I still think Thorn Ring is going to be rampant, so although I did misread it, I do not think it invalidates any of the points I'm about to make in this video in future. Anyway, back to my past self. Not been nerfed. If anything, they actually received a sort of very small buff in the fact that they are now 4/4 at base, which to be fair isn't a bad change. It's kind of stupid that they were 1/6 at base still, when, you know, it has to set them to 4/4 anyway whenever you get them off of Thorn Ring, and when you get them off of Snowgrave it also sets them to a different set of stats, so it makes sense to make them 4/4 at base, but you know, I'm just saying it makes them slightly better if you get them off of like Father Alvin or something like that. But more importantly, I don't think that a soft nerf on Thorn Ring would be too much of a big deal if it meant that their counters would still be prevalent, or maybe their counters got buffs this update. The problem here is that I think that a lot of decks that have the potential to counter Thorn Ring got nerfed this patch. And I think that Thorn Ring will still be beatable, don't get me wrong. However, I already felt like the pool of decks you had to play to be able to beat Thorn Ring realistically was relatively narrow, and now they're making it even more narrow, which I'm not a fan of. So basically what I have the biggest problem with here is, well, if I had to pick 3 things: Thorn Ring nerf, being weaker than I would have hoped, the Reflection rework, which is basically a nerf, and the final Frog nerf. So let's start with the Reflection. The Reflection's got a brand new effect. The condition is the same, 30 or more monsters in both dust piles before it be able to do its effect, and it is still a 9-cost 9/9. However, now when you play it, it burns all those 30 or more monsters, so that removes them from all the dust piles and just screws with any dust pile based decks. And it's going to be a bit of annoying, but that's not the part I'm concerned about, because I mean, it is kind of cool to have counters to that kind of stuff in the game. I just, I like Dust Pal stuff, so it makes me a little bit sad. What I'm more concerned about is the new effect. Burn them to add a copy of the enemy hand to your deck, except determination cards. Now, this is why I'm very concerned. I think that the reflection has to exist, at least its old effect, as long as we have vitality in the game. Now, I will say this, I do somewhat understand their idea of reworking the reflection, because I do think that it does restrict a lot of design space to have a 9-cost card which you can guaranteed set your opponent to 20 health to, meaning that if you have any way to easily deal 20 damage in one turn, which there are many ways to do, then you might be able to OTK your opponent too easily, and whenever you make new cards, as long as reflection exists in the game, you still have to be worried about more ways to potentially get 20 damage too easily. Most recently, how I've seen it being used most is with Ultima Thrash. Using Final Gambit, you get the 7 damage off of that, then Ultima Thrash itself has charge, and you use tHe magic to swap its stats around, which means that you get 9 damage with charge instead of 5, and that's 16 damage already. So either if you're already at 16 health or lower, you're already dead, and if you're not, you're dead to 1 BABEL or 1 Cop Undyne or 1 attack buffed Ice Cap. You get the point. I believe that's the main way that the reflection has been used recently, but of course it can be used with any OTK. Personally, I was using it in a Snail OTK deck. You play the deck like aggressive snails very early on. In fact, I might just get it up. Yeah, you play this deck like a pretty normal aggressive snail deck early on, but you'll very rarely win off of the early game, although you can sometimes, so you might get an easy dub right at the start if you get lucky. But usually you won't. Usually what you'll do is you'll use Business Snail with the constantly dying kind of mini snails to draw a whole bunch of cards to get to the bottom of your deck really quick. You obviously use Burger Pants to gain gold for the OTK, and then you Metaton Neo Assault to give it haste and +1 attack, which means it will basically be a 10 cost wipe the board and deal 7 face damage, and then Vessel to get 4 of them in total, including the original, which means that you have 28 instant burst damage and 4 board clears for 10 gold bundled with that 28 burst damage. Now of course the reflection was important here, because 28 may be close to 30, but it's not quite 30. So you would need to set your opponent's health to 20 to do this consistently. You might also notice that this is a Shorm Shop deck. I originally thought that I might have needed the extra burst damage of giving the Neo +1 damage per copy, or using these 2 extra ice caps. However, that's not usually the case. Although this can still be useful if you accidentally burn your Neo, which can sometimes happen, because sometimes you just have to leave a Business Snail up on the board knowing that it might overdraw you cards, and if it burns Neo, you haven't lost still, because you can still play the reflection, get a 6-3 ice cap off of Shorm Shop, and then Vessel the 6-3 ice cap. Truth be told, this was really just me trying to find an excuse to use Shorm Shop since it was hardly used, and yeah, even still, I think this deck might be better as a non-Shorm Shop deck, but I wanted to try out Shorm Shop, so that's why it's still the artifact. I just wanted to give it a good go. Personally, I've mostly been playing Bravery this season. I've been playing either this deck, which is what got me the last few games to Legend. I played like 4 or 5 games and I won all of them with this deck. I know that's not like a large sample size, but, you know, 100% win rate. And I also played a typical frog as you'd expect. Anyway, getting back on topic, I'm very concerned because, well, even though it's reached its peak more recently, I think it's been a problem for a while now, for quite a few months, that in UnDeRcArDs, for a long time, it's been a meta where everyone at Ruby or Diamond is playing Control, and maybe some people in Legend. And that doesn't necessarily mean that Control is unbeatable, because, I mean, I mentioned that I tend to see less people playing Control at Legend. It's mostly Ruby and Diamond, which are respectable ranks, but hey, they're not Legend. Now, while Control is beatable, it doesn't mean that it's not a problem that literally everyone is playing it when it seems like a lot of people aren't having fun against it. All you have to do is very quickly open up discussions in the UnDeRcArDs website to see people making joking death threats towards Thorn Ring users. Or at least we hope they're joking. So my point here is that Control's been very popular because quite simply Control's been given a hell of a lot of strong tools recently. And that's only continued to be the case more and more. But then what happens is, when everyone's playing Control, you're having Control versus Control games a lot. And what happens when you start losing games because your Control deck isn't stally enough? You just make it more stally. And I feel like I'm seeing this, that at Ruby and Diamond at least, opponent after opponent after opponent are just running the stalliest, most tedious decks. Now again, this isn't necessarily a, oh it's too OP kind of complaint, because there's obviously a very good solution to this. Run an OTK deck. That's why I've been playing a lot of OTK decks recently. I mean, what I got to Legend with last season was of course the Neo spam deck in DT. That was literally just a deck where you just bank on drawing Neo, and once you draw Neo you essentially win the game because you can just play Neo and then non-stop revive them with Angel Dolls, and then when you run out of Angel Dolls, if they're still not dead, you got Resurrection, and if you run out of Resurrections, then you've still got the Vessel. Or I also made a second version where you run Chris instead of the Vessel to increase consistency, because Chris can only draw one of the 3 Angel Dolls or Metaton Neo. I know the Vessel version got more popular, but actually I think the Chris version was even more strong, because you rarely needed the extra burst damage from the Vessel, although sometimes, especially if you're against someone using Vitality, you would need it. But this is me just getting to exactly what my concern is. I feel like that this next meta, I'm worried that there are only going to be 3 real types of decks. Now I say that, other decks are going to exist, but I feel like any decks outside of these are going to be very niche and very luck dependent. I feel like we're going to have Thorn Ring control, we're going to have control decks that don't use Thorn Ring but use Vitality and some other common artifact instead, and we're going to have OTK decks. And that sounds like an awful circle to have. The reason why I say that is, if you're using Thorn Ring and you go up against a Vitality deck, you probably have more value in your deck because Thorn Ring just generates an absolute ton of value over the course of the game. So I think you win. Now this is probably the most quote-unquote fair matchup, because I definitely wouldn't say that the Vitality control deck can't win, but certainly they're at a disadvantage. It's mostly just going to be tedious because both of you are going to play the game extremely stall-like style, so you're probably going to be going about 20-30 turns just to get to the end of it. And hey, there's a decent chance you'll win in the end off of fatigue. So what happens if Thorn Ring runs into an OTK? Well, the OTK absolutely obliterates them. They only have 30 health max, and they can't do anything to stop the OTK because their deck plays too reactively and not proactively enough to be able to counter the OTK before they get their OTK. And of course there aren't that many disruption tools in the game, there's basically just tutorial and then the very small disruption of Evil Eye, so you can't really stop them. I don't know, maybe you could use something like Trash Tornado? You get the idea, there isn't really a good consistent way to stop them except tutorial, which you can only use once and kinda just delays the inevitable. So if you're playing Thorn Ring and you run into OTK, you're gonna be crying because really, what can you do? It's kinda like the second you run into that opponent and figure out their OTK, you already know you've lost. And then this is the big problem. What if you're OTK and you go up against someone with Vitality? You've got to really cross your fingers that you can get your combo in time. There's a good chance by the time they have 40 health they're already out of range for you to ever OTK them. By 50, there's a very good chance that you have no hope of ever killing your opponent now if you're OTK. So in that matchup, for the OTK deck, the game is basically unwinnable by turn 10, which would be a very early point to have an OTK ready, and also basically completely unwinnable by turn 20, let alone turn 30 or beyond. So you see the problem here. Already probably one of the biggest problems with UnDeRcArDs is how sometimes it can feel a bit rock, paper, scissory. You can just start a game and just feel like, well my deck counters that deck so I win, you know. And my concern is for this update that might get to its absolute worst, because I don't see what counters any of these outside of this circle. any kind of mid-range or aggro gets absolutely steamrolled by Thorn Ring, and Thorn Ring's going to be prevalent enough that that's an issue. The mid-range or aggro decks will beat the OTK decks in general, but they also still lose to the Vitality decks. So that means 2 out of the 3 decks that seem like they're going to be prevalent are going to beat all of those kind of decks. And that's been a problem for a while, that mid-range of aggro have kind of been irrelevant, almost dead recently. There's only 2 exceptions to that really so far. One of them was of course Frogs, and the other one is Scepter. This is where I get to my next point. I don't think you should point at Frogs or Scepter and say, see, aggro's doing fine or mid-range is doing fine, because I think you really got to ask, those are some weirdly specific aggressive decks that are working. Why are these tempo-based decks working when every other one seems not to be? And my simple answer for that is, because there are so many control decks that essentially borderline guaranteed win the game by only like 8 or 9 turns in if they're not dead already. That means that you have to run a deck that goes for an enormous high roll super early on to win the game. And if you don't believe me, look at what it took to make an aggressive deck be good in this meta. It took Frogs, a deck where you would be able to play up to 3 2/2s and a 5/5 on turn 2. When we're at the point where for an aggressive or tempo based deck to be actually good on ladder, you need to have a turn 2 5/5 with 3 2/2s to be able to kill Thorn Ring before it gets its first Ice Crystal, and by the first Ice Crystal you're already probably screwed. That says a lot about the point we are at with control decks. I know in the past I said control decks are my favourite kind of decks to play, and that is true in most card games, but the longer I've played UnDeRcArDs, the more I've realised I don't think I like how they play out in UnDeRcArDs. That's of course why I've played a lot more kind of aggressive or mid-range decks instead a lot of the time, or, as of more recently, OTKs, even though I'm really not a fan of them. Again, I feel like they're a necessary evil at the moment while control is kind of rampant. So anyway, I mentioned that the final Frog Nerf was also something I wasn't happy with. Let me elaborate on that. I understand that final Frogget and the Frogget deck in general couldn't stay the way it was. I understand that it was a very easy deck to play for how strong it was, which wasn't really good for the game. I say that as someone who played it a lot to rank up. The literal reason I played it is because I'm like, it has fast games, it's super easy to play, I don't feel like playing that much this season, I'm not enjoying it that much, so let me just play Frogs, because that's the quickest, most brain switch off way I have to rank up. Not that you can't play Frogs well, and there were some people I ran into in mirrors who would play Frogs better than me, and they deserve their wins and all that. But in general, you don't have to invest that much effort into the deck to get amazing results with it. And I agree that's kind of a problem. What really concerns me here though is that this looks to me like a bit of a knee-jerk reaction from the balance team. I mean, again, I don't know everything about the game, I don't have the stats, maybe if I could see the statistics my mind would be changed. But well, to me, it feels like this nerf is just, Frogs are too good, knock it down, stop it from them being able to high roll and get the turn 2 final Frogget. And yeah, Frogs are good, but there's no stop to think, wait, why is it that we needed a tempo-based deck to get to the point where they have to high roll 9/9 worth of stats on turn 2 to even be able to do well? And that didn't provoke the thought of, hey, maybe we should take away some of Control's tools, they're getting out of hand at this rate if, tempo-based decks have to high roll that hard to have a shot. And this all equally applies to Arcane Scepter. I mean, what happened there? That started seeing a lot of use almost out of nowhere, and in fact it seems very popular at Legend too. Sure, it got that buff where it would still cast a spell even if your hand was full, but I don't think that alone is the reason why Arcane Scepter became so popular all of a sudden when it used to be such a meme. I think, to be fair, part of it comes down to the spell pool. I think the current spells in the game are generally favourable to random casts. Stuff like Duck Off didn't used to be in the spell pool. Stuff like Undyne Spears, well, that was last changed a while ago, but still, the existence of that change obviously makes it another card that just puts stats on the board even if it doesn't matter what it targets. Stuff like Wereform. But besides all that, I think the biggest reason is just, hey, high rolling off of random bullshit is the only way you can win as a tempo-based deck now. You just gotta hope that it hits that Hypergoner right when your opponent has a full board, or you just gotta hope it hits that Wereform when you need that 4 instant damage and you want to heal your damaged monster. Or you just gotta fingers crossed that on that empty board it'll randomly cast Duck Off and give you 10-10 worth of stats for 3. And I don't think that's very good for the game either, to be honest. I mean, I'm not particularly mad that Arcane Scepter's doing well. I mean, it's kind of nice for it to be good for once, but definitely it concerns me that it seems to be the only viable path to playing a tempo-based deck right now. I don't know, I could be wrong here. If any of you out there have been doing well and gotten to Legend with a deck that isn't, you know, Tempo Frogs or Arcane Scepter, then let me know below what you were using, but personally, I've been playing a lot of games seeing if I can make tempo-based decks work on my alt Technocosm for the free-to-play series, and yeah, I was losing a lot of those games. I mean, I kind of expected that, that's why I wasn't playing those games on my main account, but it was very, very, very frustrating. Also, I think because I went on such a win streak when I came back to that account, it's now matching me up against loads of high legend players, even though on that account I'm at low ruby, so that kind of sucks. But that excuse aside, the closest I got was with an integrity deck with loads of cheap dodge cards that just gets on the board super quick, uses the dodge to try and cheese out some like early kills on monsters, some good trades, and then just goes full on charge damage over the top. But even that deck got very few wins. I did get some wins, but most of them were against Sapphire and Amethyst players, which I kind of don't want to count. There was one game I had against Kawashi Nitori, who was one of the better players in the game, who was playing, I think it was a Determination kind of control deck, and I got them down to 1, but unfortunately the turn I got them down to 1 was the turn they played Muffet, and then they just got all the way back up to 15 health with taunts on board because Muffet. Anyway, all this to say, yeah, I don't like this reflection change. I feel like it's going to make OTKs lose every single time to Vitality. I'm fine with this reflection change if Vitality also gets changed, but it didn't get changed this update. I also think that this new effect for the reflection just encourages you to play even more stally, because I do have to ask, what benefit is shuffling a copy of the enemy hand into your deck unless your plan is to fatigue your opponent? I get that you might get something cool from their hand, but you don't get any of those cards straight away, and at the end of the day that's what, 5, 6 or maybe 7 cards in your deck, which is 25 cards. Now to be fair, mid-game, by the time you play this, it's probably close to like 12, but still, you're banking on random chance for you to draw one of those soon, and when you draw one, you don't even know what's in your opponent's hand. How do you know it's going to be good? Unless you're running Evil Eye or something. But that sounds like a lot of effort to go through just to get a copy of a card in your opponent's hand that might be good, but you could also have just put that thing in your deck. I'm genuinely thinking here, and the only thing I can think is, the only reason you would ever use this card is to stall out the game even longer. Which, do we really need another card that stalls out the game even longer than it already was going to go in most situations right now? I really don't think so. So hopefully you can see what I mean when I say that this broad critique of this update. I could be completely wrong. I have not played in this update yet, and I'm hoping that I'm wrong. But I'm just thinking, with the way it looks right now, it looks like it's going to be an absolute rock, paper, scissors fest of, oh, are you running OTK? Well, you win then if I'm normal control with like Thorn Ring, but you lose if I'm Vitality control. Oh, if I'm Vitality control, I lose to Thorn Ring, but I beat OTK, and if you get the point. It's going to be a lot of, oh, I win, or oh, I lose the second the game starts, and then you're going to have to play an extra 30 turns or whatever, knowing that you've already won or lost. I think the only other decks that are going to exist on the side are extremely high rolly, complete luck, bullshit go kind of decks, again, like Scepter. I mentioned this in another video before, but I think it bears mentioning again. I think that what they did with Vitality was kind of cool. They actually made this previously useless artifact have an effect, and this new effect was actually something really strong. I was kind of glad when they first made the change that they had the balls to give something that adds a whole extra 10 health to your health bar even if it does take 10 turns, especially making it trigger multiple times. That's a lot of value to get off of one single common artifact if you can live that long. But at the end of the day, I don't think it's a good thing when you're playing an OTK deck that's very focused on dealing a certain amount of damage to your opponent to kill them in a certain number of turns or whatever. Hopefully one, but not always. I don't think it's then good for you to have to, at the very start of the match, see that vitality thing and know, oh wait, actually this person's going to have 40 or 50 health, and now I literally can't win. And again, I wasn't complaining that much about this before, because while I still thought it was an issue, I thought, well, at the very least, we got reflection in the game, and I don't want to just be complaining for the sake of complaining. I feel like there's enough people who complain about the game already in chat, and I don't want to be too much of a downer. But I think we have hit a point here where I really do have to put my foot down and say I really do not think this is good for the game. Vitality was cool for a bit, now it's getting very, very annoying. I'd be open to it getting another brand new effect, but I don't even think you need to change the effect. It's exactly how I said it in the earlier video. I think that what Vitality needs, if you don't want to change the effect, is to make it so that it has a shorter timer to give you a smaller health boost. I think I said maybe 6 health extra every 8 turns in that older video, which I think I would still stick by. That means that a Vitality deck would only have 36 health up until turn 16. And I think as long as you're quick, a lot of OTK decks could get their combo ready by turn 16, and 36 is still difficult for them, but it's doable. Yeah, they could still get themselves out of range if they ran health and Vitality, but also they'd have to sacrifice so much value to run both health and Vitality. I think the deck would become a lot weaker against a lot of other decks at that point. Oh yeah, and I just realised I didn't even mention something that I think was probably quite important to bring up. Thorn Ring has been so dominant that a lot of the other artifacts that were added recently have seen, like, no play. Okay, now that's harsh. So Puppet Scarf and Dealmaker have seen a decent amount of play, but to be frank, playing Puppet Scarf and Dealmaker decks, I feel like I am literally just choosing to play objectively worse control decks than the Thorn Ring decks just for the sake of being unique. And that's not to criticize anyone who does use them, because hey, I can understand the want to be unique. Right now it's, are you a Frogs player or are you a Thorn Ring player a lot of the time. But it does mean that it doesn't feel very satisfying to play these decks for me, since Puppet Scarf has mostly been used in control with things like Metaton Fountain, which makes sense. But again, you could just be running Thorn Ring and it would probably do better. And Dealmaker has, as I, well, sort of predicted, although my first prediction was wrong, ended up more being used in control decks, taking advantage of all the stuff you kill to give you more gold, but more specifically it's mostly been used in pieces, which honestly I really should have seen coming. I just don't play pieces that much, so I wasn't thinking about it. And don't get me wrong, it's probably the best artifact in pieces, but I don't think pieces is the best control deck right now, so yeah. In fact, I don't think I've lost to pieces once since the update, and I've seen it a lot. Elite Soldiers, I predicted, might see some very small amount of play as a niche way to win control mirrors, because obviously it's anti-fatigue and it gives you large value right at the end of the game. So if you were getting in a bunch of control mirrors and you wanted to beat the other control deck, then Elite Soldiers would be a good way to, you know, absolutely confirm that'll happen. But I made an oversight, and that is that I forgot about Caged Jester. Of course, with Thorn Ring becoming the best way to do control now, you're already making very heavy spell-based control decks, and when it's a heavy spell-based control deck, you're already activating Caged Jester, so you may as well put it in your deck, and if you're putting Caged Jester in your deck, you're already getting extra cards that will go near the bottom of your deck that are going to be especially powerful, effectively doing the same thing as Elite Soldiers, but without having to give up your valuable artifact slots, meaning you can either run something actually good like Thorn Ring, or you can run a way to absolutely make OTK decks cry like Vitality, which is absolutely worth the trade. And as a result, Elite Soldiers, I don't think anyone has even tried. I haven't seen it once. And I already brought up Shawm's Shop. It's exactly as I predicted. It's not enough damage to really get reliable OTKs a lot of the time, and it really sucks to have to give up all of your artifact slots just to get a little bit of extra charge damage, especially when it's only right at the end of the game. So really, I think the only legendary artifact that's been performing all that well is Thorn Ring. And because Thorn Ring is in control, and every other artifact that had a hope of doing well was also for control, yeah, you can see how this all failed. Every single time, it's like, okay, I could try this other artifacts, but I could just run Thorn Ring instead. I want to be absolutely clear so no one takes this out of context. I'm not saying Thorn Ring is unbeatable. You absolutely can beat it, but I think that it's a problem that Thorn Ring is only beatable by a super high roll early on with a tempo-based deck, which is not very reliable. I definitely think it loses 90% of the time if you're playing a tempo-based deck, unless it's something that tempo swings so hard that it wins like super early like Frogits did. Like I won a lot of games with that Frogit deck on turn 4 or 5 just because I swung that hard early on. I think the only other way you can beat it, which is actually consistent, is of course OTKs. So you can see my problem here is less, oh I can't beat Thorn Ring, and more, if I want to beat Thorn Ring, I have like 2 decks to pick from. Oh, and also they nerfed Glamburger. I'm actually not too mad about that, because I think any deck that planned on using Glamburger before probably still runs it, because at the end of the day, if you're running Glamburger, you're running it for the 1 extra gold at the start of the game. You're not sad that you don't draw an extra card anymore, really. I imagine it's just going to make the decks that do run Glamburger have a very slightly lower win rate, but I do have to say it still feels like a bit of a gut punch seeing Glamburger get nerfed again, knowing that tempo-based decks are struggling so hard to exist right now without having to rely on random bullshit go at ultra high rolling. So, yeah, it is a reasonable nerf in fairness, but I am a little bit mixed on the idea that they're even trying to nerf Glamburger so early. Oh yeah, I don't even know if I mentioned, I should have, but just to be clear, the reason why Glamburger was good is it's what allowed you to play Final Frogget turn 2. I actually kind of missed the mark when I said that I could see Glamburger being used to play Birdly turn 2. It was actually used to play Final Frogget turn 2. Anyway, that's my broad criticism of this patch. Obviously, fingers crossed I'm a little wrong. I'm going to be a little bit more positive for the rest of the video because I don't like being too much of a downer. A lot of these other changes though, for the most part, with some exceptions, I don't have much to say about, so I'll get through them relatively quickly. Sad Dragon has gotten a 1 extra health. Sad Dragon was the 6/5/4 with dodge 1, now it's going to be a 5/5 instead. Probably changes very little because that card already is a card with no active ability that also has dodge, so it doesn't really care about having health that much, although most cards tend to care about it a lot. But it is a tempo-based card, and it is a tempo-based card that just got 1 extra stat, so hey, might be good. Mio Mio San got a much-deserved buff, just costing a whole 1 less gold, no catch, absolutely deserved. I actually left out Mio Mio San when I was talking about Disruption earlier, and that's because even though she obviously has the potential to be a Disruption card, I really don't think she actually is 90% of the time. At the end of the day, she just halves the stats of a card in the opponent's hand. She doesn't make it cost more, she doesn't take it out of their hand, she doesn't really do anything substantial to prevent them from playing it, and usually if you're worried about a specific card, it's usually because of its effect, not because of its stats. Or it might be an effect that's dependent on its stats, in which case it might actually be a big, play to use Mio Mio San and yoink it and take half its stats if it's something like a Chris, or it's something like, hey, even a buffed up frog. I didn't even think of that until now. Maybe that's even the reason why they decided to do this buff right now, is because they realized that, hey, if frogs are getting buffed out of control, Mio Mio San should have showed up to counter them, but obviously she didn't because she was awful. At the end of the day, I'd consider her effect worse than drawing a card, and it really puts in perspective when you think of her as a 5-cost 4/4 draw a card. Yeah, that's not good. At least a 4-cost 4/4 draw a card is a bit better. And I do think she is around the value of draw a card. Obviously she can high roll more than drawing a single card, because obviously she could hit something really big in the opponent's hand. But I do think that most of the time, when she hits something, it will either be something that isn't that valuable to you when it gives you their card, but you just want to halve its stats, or the other way around. It's actually very valuable to you, but halving its stats does basically nothing, because if it's valuable to you, it's probably some kind of effect, like, I don't know, Jevil or Queen or whatever. And finally, Apoca Duck. Well, it got taunt. Very simple, but I'm absolutely for it. Apoca Duck is specifically the token version of the duck, not the collectible epic card Chaos Duck, which transforms a monster into Apoca Duck when played. Speaking of Chaos Duck, I think this is mostly relevant to Chaos Duck, which of course is a 7-cost 5/5 that transforms another monster into a 5/5 Apoca Duck with taunt. However, well, taunt, it has taunt now, it didn't used to. Mostly because that kind of card is mostly used in zoo decks which fill the board with the tiny monsters, and then obviously turn those tiny monsters into big 5/5s, and now that 5/5 is going to have taunt, which is going to help protect your engines that you're probably running in a zoo deck. Stuff like Orange Laser, stuff like tHe, stuff like, what's the other one I'm thinking of? Nice Green Guy, that's it. Although that one's a bit more rare to see, but yeah. All of those kind of cards help get protected by the fact this now will now have taunt. All that being said, I think this is a nice gesture to make aggressive-based decks that are very swarmy better. I'm not sure if it'll work unless Dealmaker pops off with them in future. But you know, I appreciate the gesture. Also, this taunt will of course also apply to Duck Off, but I just don't think it's going to be that relevant in that case. I don't think there's many times that I play Duck Off and I need taunt to survive. But I mean, I'm not going to complain about it. Evil Eye. Now, I did say I was going to be a bit less negative here. This is a very good example of that. I will praise this change. Evil Eye, as much as I found it a satisfying card to use, obviously it was awful to have it used against you. And that's because if you were going second, you could play this turn 1. So turn 1, you were playing a substantial threat on the board because it has 3 attack, and every single turn it lives, it lets your opponent see your entire hand and choose something to make more expensive. And of course, if you only have 1 card in your hand that can kill it, they're going to make that thing as expensive as humanly possible. And there is a pretty good chance that you only have 1 card in your hand that can kill it, considering by the time it passes over to your turn, you need to kill something with 4 health instantly on turn 2. And try to find a way to deal 4 damage instantly on turn 2. Don't get me wrong, there are ways, but there aren't many. It's stuff like punishment for the most part that gets it done. Then we got 2 small changes. The base stats of Ice Crystal and the base stats of Spear have been changed. Ice Crystal is now a 4-4 instead of a 1-6, and Spear is now a 3-3-3 instead of a 0-1-1. This only affects resurrecting them from the dust pile. I don't believe it affects any other situation, unless there's some way to get a base copy of them. Unless you're bringing them back from the dust pile, this will never matter, but I mean, I guess it's there if it ends up mattering at some point. I've already covered the reflections change, not a big fan at all. Oh yeah, I didn't mention, there is still somewhere I could see this new reflection being used, and that is, I already mentioned that any Thorn Ring deck doesn't need something that shuffles more cards into the deck for the most part, because it already has Cage Jester. I said that it might use Elite Soldiers, but then Cage Jester kind of took its job. For that reason, I think the Reflection will take the place of Cage Jester if you're running a non-spell-based control deck, because of course you need spells for Cage Jester, whereas for the Reflection you just need monsters in both dust piles. I think that's the only situation in which the Reflection sees play. Could be wrong if there's some kind of combo you could do with it, but obviously I get the impression that's not the case. I mean, I'm trying to think, but all I could think is that you could maybe give your opponent a card with Aesthetic Aaron and then get a copy in your deck with the Reflection, but then what have you done? You've just taken a card from your hand and put it back in your deck and given it to your opponent as well. You know, bit of a weird play, you know. Anyway, here's another part where we can get a bit more positive, although I still have a few concerns about this rework, but generally I'm, you know, positive about this. Mettaton EX got completely reworked. Mettaton EX used to be a 7-cost 6/8, which brought itself back to life every single time it died, as long as you had 7 gold or more, and it would spend that gold regardless of whether you wanted to or not. Now it's 10 cost, still a 6/8, and when it's played, if either player has 10 or more gold after spending gold on this, set both players' gold to 0. Now, I was an idiot when I first read this, and I was very confused, because I thought that this said if both players have 10 or more gold. So I thought, wait, so you need 20 gold for this? But then I realised it was either player, which makes this make a lot more sense, and makes the use of this pretty clear. This is obviously a very disruptive card, and I absolutely approve of more disruption existing in the game, because even though I do think Control's pretty evil right now, I also think it's better if we have less matchups where you start the game and you've already lost and there's nothing you can do about it. And having disruption means that, although it's still a slim shot, because it should be, because Control should generally lose to OTK, at least if you go against OTK as a Control deck that doesn't have Vitality, now you actually have something you can try and do, some kind of out to play to. At least if you have disruption in your deck. So that's the only reason I'm a little concerned about this card. I'll say this, I think this new version of Mettaton EX is generally healthy for the game. I'm just worried about it in the context of this meta. I think long term, this is a good change. But in this meta in particular, I feel like this card heavily punishes OTKs, and it's like, I'm not getting punished enough. Didn't you already punish them enough when you took away the reflection and kept in Vitality as it was? Didn't you already punish it enough with, you know, Ice Crystals? Now you're going to add Mettaton EX to the pile. That's the only reason why I'm a little bit concerned. But again, I do think long term this is healthy for the game. And in fairness, Mettaton EX might even be the one way I might end up being proven wrong about this meta, which I feel very pessimistic about. Because in fairness, it's not just OTK decks this screws over, although that's definitely the big one. This also could potentially screw over control decks, particularly stally ones. A lot of these control decks that are especially stally run almost nothing but reactive cards. They can't really play a card onto an empty board without losing value because that card was supposed to target something a lot of the time. A lot of these control decks, usually the early game is stuff like Tiny Tornado and stuff like that. They can't just play it out there when there's nothing for it to attack into. Which means if you don't play anything, you can kind of force them to also not play anything, hoard a bunch of gold, and then just nab all their gold with Mettaton EX. Fingers crossed that's actually a real strategy and you can make that work. I hope that's the case. But I will admit, I'm a bit skeptical. I definitely don't think this is a bad card, I just think that, again, I think it's mostly a problem of Control has too many tools right now, and I think that these small little things that help a little aren't going to large scale change anything. And that's it for the monster changes. The only other change here is that failed design no longer says with taunt on the card, because obviously now Apoca Duck has taunt anyway, so it doesn't have to tell you it summons an Apoca Duck with taunt. Getting a bit more positive again though, we have the spell balance changes, which for the most part I feel very positively about. Feast already is one of the ones that I'm the most excited about. It's received a change to cost 2 instead of 4, and it now gives a monster -1/-1 instead of -2/-2, but most importantly, its delay used to be if it's not dead, as in if the target of that spell that you gave -2/-2 did not die that turn, then you give all ally monsters +1/+1, and I was never a fan of this effect. Well, at least the condition, because it was clearly a tempo-based card, but it discouraged you from taking favourable trades, even after you set up a favourable trade by giving it -2/-2. Now I think the idea here is they thought it might be too overpowered to have a 4-cost spell, which gives one target -2/-2, and then also gives everything on your board +1/+1. And I mean, I guess I see the logic in that, but I obviously disagree. I think that's perfectly balanced. And I think they were trying to balance it out by making it oh, well, you have to leave something alive on your opponent's board to be able to do that. And obviously that sucks. I much prefer this version where it actually encourages you to take that smart trade and rewards you by giving you a nice board-wide buff for only 2 that came with a bit of a debuff. Alongside that, Force of Nature also got a change that also helps it support a more aggressive playstyle. It now costs 3 instead of 1, and instead of just giving you +3 health straight up or giving a monster +3 health, it will instead deal 3 damage, and any excess damage is converted into a health buff for every ally on the board. Now I've got to say, I do think this Force of Nature one looks a little bit weaker. Not to say it's bad, absolutely not. All I'm thinking is, it's 3 damage for 3 a lot of the time, which isn't that great of course. Punishment is 4 damage for 3, but hey, it's in kindness, not justice, so that's something. But of course, what you really want with this card is the high roll, which is using this to kill a 1 health monster, in which case it is 3 to deal 1 damage and give everything on your board +2 health. Don't get me wrong, that is not a bad effect. All I'm going to say is this. Regal. That kind of does the same thing, except instead of the 1 damage, you get a 2/4 on the board instead of, you know, 1 damage bundled with it for the same cost. Now in fairness, Regal only works on plants, but I don't know how much that holds him back. I could be proven wrong on Force of Nature, but I feel like it could use a small bit extra of like a bit of a push. But either way, I appreciate the sentiment, and it looks good. It looks like with this Feast and Force of Nature change, both of which have big high roll potential that's very dependent on getting monsters at the exact right health values and all that, and setting these nice trades up. It looks like they're really trying to build towards a new, especially aggressive version of kindness, which I am fully in favour for. Royal Justice has also been changed. The True Justice artifact got completely reworked as well, so it's now to do with multi-shot, which we're going to get to later. So as a result, Royal Justice no longer gives True Justice. Now it costs 2, and it's still a very value-based effect. Instead, it will add 1 copy of every single non-token Justice spell that you cast over the course of that entire game to your hand, and they all cost 1 less. Which sounds really powerful in theory, but I don't think you're going to be able to fit a lot of those in your hand a lot of the time in those kind of decks. It's kind of like how Snowell got gutted by the fact that she now fills your hand with ice crystals with Snowgrave instead of putting them in your deck. It sounds like it wouldn't be a big deal, but it ended up being a big deal, and I think that might still be the case here. Although in fairness, it depends. If you get to play this at the end of the game consistently, and you don't have to play it any earlier, then maybe that's not the case, because at the end of the game it's much easier to have an empty hand. Undyne Spears got a nice rework. It used to be a bit weird. It used to be a 5-cost summon a 3/4 version of Spears with Taunt, and then you got to summon a second one to get in 6/8 of stats for 5 with Taunt in total, but it cost 2 bodies. if you had played a generated card this turn, which is a bit of a weird effect to have in Justice, honestly. And now it's got a much more fitting effect. It still summons 2 spears. Now those spears have a default stat line of 3/3/3, as you remember, so they're not going to be 1/1s like they would be otherwise. They attack the lowest attack enemy monsters, and then it has program 8. Set their stats to 8/8 first. Okay, so here's the thing. I think this card is actually scary. Well, okay, I wouldn't say straight up broken, but definitely very strong, and I feel like it's going to be a 3 of in every control deck in Justice now. Why am I saying that? Well, mostly because of the program. I think the base effect is fair, but nothing crazy. The program, you can think of that as a 13 cost 16/16 with haste split across 2 bodies. Only it would kind of be even better, because since it's split across 2 bodies, you get 2 attacks. Now in fairness, those 2 attacks aren't targeted, it has to hit the lowest attack enemy monster, but usually that's going to be the best target, because of course that will provide the best trade. And as well as that, that can go through Taunt, which means they can't protect their engines with Taunt. So you have a 13 cost, which is a lot, but a 13 cost spell, which summons an absolutely enormous and potentially game-winning amount of stats that instantly attacks and is split across 2 bodies, and you get to cast that spell 3 times in one game if you want to, if you get enough gold. And on top of that, that's not even considering if you manage to recur it using something like, I don't know, Cafe, Jukebox, or thingy. The Golden Flowers, things like that. So yeah, that looks very strong for Justice control decks. Bit scary. We'll see what the power level is on that one. I mean, the only thing that makes me a little bit unsure that I might be overestimating it is Undyne. Undyne, not always, but it's generally a bit of an underwhelming card, and that's a 13 cost 7/8 that if you play it on an empty board comes with an 8/8. So that you could say, well, that's a 17 cost. You could say that's a 13 cost 15/16, which is basically a 16/16 split across 2 bodies, and that isn't necessarily one of the better cards in the game. But I think it's just because it doesn't have a taunt or an instant attack. This version is going to attack instantly, and I think that's going to be the difference maker. Anyway, the only change here that I'm not really a fan of is Energiser. Energiser's got completely changed to a 3 cost spell, which gives all ally monsters +1 attack and deals 1 damage to all enemy monsters. And it used to be a 1 cost spell that would deal 1 damage to one of your own monsters twice to give it +2 attack and haste. Now the reason why I'm not that much of a fan of Energiser being changed is I kind of like the old version. Obviously it was nice to work with any kind of when this is damage cards, especially a Receptionist one, but even non-when this is damage cards, stuff like Snoring Monsters was really nice with Energiser. And I think there's no spells left in the game that really have self-damage when it comes to monsters, not your own health bar synergy. The only thing I can think of is Green Fire, which obviously isn't a spell and also isn't really that helpful yet. Like, yeah, it's self-damage, but it's 1 stack of self-damage. It's like, eh. So I think it makes a decent amount of these self-damage tick cards, although in fairness there aren't that many of them, feel more useless, and it also, just this new version I feel is a bit redundant. Like, we already have Strafe. Did we need a 3 cost deal 1 damage to all enemy monsters when we already have a 4 cost deal 2 damage to all enemy monsters, and we also already have Police Line, which a lot of the time is effectively a 7 cost deal 3 damage to all enemy monsters and summon a 3/2 with Taunt. Like, was it really necessary to also have Energiser be a board clear? Really? Now obviously I see what this is supposed to be used for. This is supposed to be an aggressive card that's also trying to be a board clear, which is very strange to me. I feel like this is almost always going to be either just give all enemy monsters. I feel like every time this is played, it's most likely going to be give all of your monsters +1 attack and then deal 1 damage to one enemy monster. I feel like most of the time you're going to get 1 taunt played against you or 1 something like a Metaton Fountain, and you're not going to have anything else to target with this. And if you do wait for more targets, by the time there are more targets on the board, you're not going to have that many monsters left to give the attack buff to. One of those 2 effects is almost always going to have a much smaller impact. And really, I feel like you've got to high roll that quite hard to actually get a lot off of Energiser. I'll put it this way. Janitor exists. Is Energiser better than Janitor? I honestly think in a lot of situations the answer is going to be no. And if they were going to make it this way, I feel like they've got an easy fix to this. Just make it cost 2. I think at 2 it's fine. But either way, I'm being a bit too negative again. I at least appreciate that they're trying to make more tempo-based decks, you know, decent again. Finally, we got multi-shot, which, oh, thank God that got changed. Yeah, multi-shot was a very annoying card. Again, for anyone who might be watching this video in the future and don't remember exactly what multi-shot was like on this exact month, it was a 1-cost justice spell that would deal damage equal to its cost, and when it killed something, it would go back to your hand with +1 cost. So it would be 1 deal 1 damage, 2 deal 2 damage, 3 deal 3 damage, and that would continue infinitely, as long as you could keep affording to play it. You can probably see what the problem with that is. Yeah, people could afford to play it for a really long time in these story metas, and also all that gold spent on all those multi-shots all counted towards Thorn Ring. The only thing that wasn't broken about it is at the very least, since it wasn't base cost, it didn't trigger good food shock, so you couldn't heal off of it at the very least, but still, that didn't change the fact that it was, yeah, stupidly strong in combination with Thorn Ring, and already a very annoying card without Thorn Ring, so very worthwhile changing. And I gotta say, I actually am a fan of this new effect, because it's kind of going back to its roots. At least, this is the earliest version of multi-shot I can remember, so I think it's the original. When multi-shot was first added, I believe its effect was simply a 5-cost spell that made your passive trigger twice every turn, and it did stack so you can make it trigger 3 times by running 2 of them, which was really cool. I remember I really liked that version back in the day, and I remember, again, I wasn't really playing ranked at this time, so I probably wasn't a very good player, but still, my absolute favourite kind of deck to play around with was a Justice deck with Papyrus Statue, which ages ago used to be a I think it was a 5/1/5 that as long as it was alive, it would make every damage that every enemy took +1 to what it normally would be. And I would use that with multi-shot, and by the end of the game, I would be firing 6 damage per turn off with just my passive, which I had a lot of fun with that. But I can also see how that was probably overpowered, so I'm assuming that when that got changed ages ago, it was stupid overpowered. I could definitely see that, or at least there was some way to abuse it. Anyway, I always kind of wanted that older version back, but I realised it was probably gotten rid of for good reason. Kind of similar to Brain Freeze. You don't know about Brain Freeze. It used to be a patient spell that cost 6 that forced both players to skip 1 turn. And since it skipped both of your turns, it seemed like a pretty fair card, but people always found a way to, you know, do some real degenerate stuff with it. And it's one of those things where I really thought it was a really fun and cool card that could help force both players into the late game, which was really fun if you're running a very value-orientated deck. But yeah, at the same time I acknowledge that if Brain Freeze was added back into the game now, as much as I kind of want it back, it probably wouldn't be very healthy. So that's a bit of a tangent, but that's all to say that I think that I approve of this multi-shot change, because this new effect feels like it catches the energy of the original effect without keeping what made the original effect a problem. So now, this is a 4-cost spell, which at the end of your turn will add the True Justice artifact to your artifacts, and if you have it, which you should because it just added it, it will trigger its turn end until it has no counters, and then after it triggers all its counters, it will add 6 to them. So, below you can see the True Justice artifact, and what it essentially does is, it is just what it used to be. It makes your passive trigger twice every turn, except now it also triggers an extra time every time you play a spell that costs 2 or more at base. So it's even better, except one caveat which helps make it not get stupidly out of control. You now have to spend a counter to deal that 1 damage, and that counter obviously is a limited amount of them. It starts with 6, so essentially multi-shot when you initially play it is a 4-cost, deal 6 damage split randomly across all enemies. I don't think it can hit face, no it can't, so that's aside from face. Which already, I think that's fair, 6 damage for 4, even if it's randomly split. Especially if you got, like, Lancer down as well. Oh wait, I'm not sure actually though. I don't think that would actually count now I think about it, because the damage would be from the artifact, not the spell, so I don't think that works with Lancer. Oh. Well, anyway, still, 6 damage for 4. But then, as well as that, it will give you another 6 damage slowly over the next 6 turns, which you can slightly accelerate the speed of using more spells. If you play multi-shot again, then I assume it just gives you another 6 counters and it doesn't deal the instant 6 damage. Which just leaves one more change we haven't talked about. Draw's been reworked. This was a bit unexpected. It used to be that it would give you an extra card every 4 turns if your hand wasn't full. Now it gives you an extra card at the start of the game, like Glamburger used to, and then gives you another extra card every 6 turns. So this is a bit of a weird one. this could be a buff or it could be a nerf. I think it's definitely going in the right direction because this is trying to encourage more aggressive sort of decks. Basically, the calculation is here that you get more cards from the new version of draw before turn 8, but after turn 12 you get less cards from it. So basically, if your deck can win before turn 8, then running draw is now better than it used to be. If your deck could win in between turn 4 to 6, or in between turns 8 and 12, then it's exactly as good as it used to be. And if your deck could win later than turn 12, but was running draw still, then now this is worse. So I'm not gonna lie, when I first saw this, I thought this was probably overall a slight nerf, although I wasn't really mad about it. Just because, in fairness, I feel like if you're playing mid-range, which I think is the most common deck that uses draw, although aggro can of course as well, I feel like you do often get dragged towards this sort of turn 15 kind of range, even though that's obviously not what you're going for. But in fairness, that might be partially just due to the kind of meta we're in right now. And of course, I do want more aggro to be encouraged, and now draw is being kind of framed as a more aggressive sort of artifact. Those are my thoughts on the changes for this patch. I'm fingers crossed that it's not going to be as bad as I think, but yeah, I've got to admit, I'm very pessimistic about this patch. Oh yeah, and I just thought I'd quickly show to demonstrate what I'm talking about when I talk about, I feel like, you know, there's a very smaller pool of decks. You can see my win rate's very low with Determination. Determination, I tried to play Puppet, Scarf, and Dealmaker, but it's pretty high with Perseverance, although not many games. That's because I played Thorn Ring with Perseverance, and you can see it's highest with Bravery, where I played Frogs and, of course, the OTK Snails deck, for a total of exactly 2 in 3 win rate. And as you can see, I haven't really played that many games this season because, as I said, I haven't been that into it. But before we go, one last thing. A lot of you who are watching are already aware of my second channel, of course, for music production. But this thing at the end isn't to plug that, it's to plug something related to that though. A smaller amount of you might have also realised that I have a friend called Snare, who is in my Discord server and I've worked with a couple times. He also makes electronic music and he's also pretty good at it. And he's essentially looking to start his own sample pack company, Power of BABEL, and I've of course been helping him with that. Now I actually made this sample pack I'm about to show you over a year ago, but back when we did, I wasn't making edited YouTube videos to plug it in, and also we didn't have a website yet to put it on. There was just like a Google Drive link, but I wanted to plug it now because, as I say, we've now got a website to put all these sample packs on. And also, Snare is soon going to be releasing a new sample pack on there called tHe. Aside from that new one though, there's already a sample pack on there called TEAROUT, which is made by both me and Snare and is completely free to download. So hey, if there's anyone out there who's aspiring to produce some music, then there you go, there's a free sample pack for you. It would really help us out if any of you decide to go download it. Link will be in the description and hopefully in a pinned comment too if I remember. Thank you for watching, I'll see you in the next one, goodbye.